Okay, thank you for being so patient, everybody. A very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you are joining us around the world today, and a very warm welcome to this fifth and the final webinar we are running in the series of Return to Work sessions. Once again, a big thank you for joining us here today for what I know is going to be another excellent session focused around communication. To all those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Glenn Ridsdale, and I am the Managing Director of Gauge Solutions. But more importantly for this morning, I'm here in my role as the Chairman of the iirsm North Eastern Cumbria region. On the webinar with me today are Andy Grant, Derek, Barry and Az, who along with myself all form part of the Regional Strategy Group and help to ensure sessions such as this or visits or webinars like today actually do happen. I'm delighted to welcome and be joined today by Michael Laverty. Michael is the Chief Exec of Brand and Reputation, and he will provide you with a more detailed introduction to himself and his business at the beginning of his session, which today is entitled Communicating Effectively with Your Workforce During Return to Work Post-COVID-19. Never, in my opinion, has it been more important in recent times to communicate effectively with your workforce. And I know you're going to get some great takeaway messages from Michael today. So a special thanks to him for stepping in, given we only managed to provide him with 48 hours notice. So fantastic support. Cheers for that, Michael. For those of you who are new to Zoom, probably not many, given what we've all been going through in the last few months and having to use various forms of networking media, you'll see that there is a chat facility at the bottom of the screen. So once again, please feel free to use this in order to ask any questions that, as per on the other webinars we've run, I will post to Michael at the end, where we'll also have a very brief update on what next for the North Eastern Cumbria region of iirsm. So before I hand over, a little bit of housekeeping if I can. As per the other webinars we've delivered, please can I make a polite request that everyone keeps their microphones muted for the duration and videos remain off for the full session as well. The session will be recorded and it'll be uploaded to the iirsm North Eastern Cumbria LinkedIn page within the next 24 hours. So, okay, without further ado, I'll hand over to Michael and come back to you all at the end for a summary, recap, questions, etc. So, Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Glenn, and good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be joining you this morning. So thanks to Glenn and to the team and my introduction to iirsm. Let me start with a little bit of context, with a little bit of a background in terms of my career. So I established a national and international brand marketing and communications consultancy 3.5 years ago. And I work around the world, particularly with the higher education, the university sectors, with the NHS and health sector, and with the third sector. But along that way as well, I've also worked with big global brands like Audi and like Deutsche Bank. But my early comms career, as a consultant, I worked with large brands like Enron, including managing the incident around in the year 2000 when an explosion at their power plant in Teesside here in the Northeast resulted in the death of 3 colleagues. And I managed all of the internal and external communications around that. I also worked at that time with brands like LG Philips and Nissan. And more recently, I've been working with the Northeast Local Enterprise Partnership around their innovation strategy. So some experience across those big industry beasts here in the Northeast of England. I worked at Teesside University and at Durham University, where I was part of their incident response teams and their risk management groups. So I was working on responses to governance reviews, to compliance audits, to things like student suicides, attending tribunals, and even managing some big global scandals and challenges around imprisonment of students in the Middle East, responding to WikiLeaks exposures and challenges as well. So a lot of experience around risk, but my background is very much in that broader communication strategy. And I'm going to share some of that experience with you this morning. So without further ado, let me start the session. As Glenn said, the title is Communicating with Your Returning Workforce on the back of the COVID-19 lockdown. And I'm going to be sharing with you, as Glenn said, a number of takeaways, a little bit of theory. I do apologize if any of this is too high level. I certainly don't want to come across as being at all condescending or simplistic, but there is a structured approach to effective communications that I want to share with you. And I am conscious that it's a very diverse group this morning, and that amongst you there are perhaps only a few who would claim to be experts or specialists in communication. So forgive me if any of this is something that you know, but hopefully it's all helpful reinforcement and support. So let me move to the next slide. If I start with just some definitions to make sure we're all on the same page, that we all have a universal understanding of what we mean by communications. It's a term that will feature in every one of our job descriptions. It's expected from the leaders of our organizations to the new staff joining us and part of their induction. We expect good communications. You'll have seen it in the job adverts and in the job descriptions as an essential criteria. But communications is much more than just being able to speak up. It's about much more than broadcasting your messages or getting your point across. It is, as defined here by the Institute of Management, a management process. So it's like any other process, it's got elements to it that need to be followed. It has a structure. It's a process which identifies and anticipates the requirements of an audience, a customer, and in this case, members of your workforce. And it's a process that has to have an element of rigor. It has to be done efficiently and accurately to be effective. It's no good just trying to, as I say in that third bullet point, to broadcast, to impose your messages upon your audience. It has to be a mutually beneficial transaction. It has to be true dialogue between two parties. And in that sense, my work as a consultant and my work in this field, I'm very much torn between two masters. So I want to work with my clients to help them communicate the information that they want to relay, to get their point across, to achieve their objectives. But I also have to be mindful of the audience. What do they want to hear? What information is most important to them? How do they want to hear it? When do they want to hear it? What do we want them to do next? How are they going to feel about this? And if I can look at both of those sides, I can help my clients to design and plan their communications to be really effective. You can see there the origins of communications comes from Latin, from the word commune. So you'll think of community or communion. So again, it's this idea of trying to find common ground. It's not about one-way traffic. It's not about shouting your message loudly and hoping people will hear, or sending an email and thinking that you've done your job. It really is about making sure that you get people on the same page, shared message, collective understanding. Our focus today is very much on internal communications, communicating with our own workforce or the workforce of our clients. But of course, the values and the principles of communications across external and internal audiences have a lot of commonality. And whilst we're focusing on internal comms for today's webinar, I'm sure you'll all appreciate that if you get internal comms wrong, then the impact externally on your reputation and on your brand can be really significant. And there are lots of examples in the media on a weekly basis of businesses that get that wrong. If you think of the recent Sports Direct memo to staff about effectively ignoring government guidance and staying open during the lockdown, that memo was leaked very, very quickly, and it soon became a big external story which affected the reputation of that retail business in the UK. Okay, to give a bit of sense of where we are now, we want to explore the challenges of communications post-COVID-19. And I've put a graphic on the screen there, which I hope you can all see. And this is encouraging us to think about the fact that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to communications. And we only have to think about our own workforce, or imagine the workforce of our clients. You'll see from that graphic there that there are 5 different generations that we might expect to find within our workforce. So I'm sure you can probably all think of a colleague that would fit into each of those 5 categories there, from the traditionalists, so they will be the senior, long-serving colleagues, perhaps at the end of their career, right the way through to Generation Z. That might feel like a new term, and those dates may look very young, 1996 to 2010. But that, of course, could be the modern apprentice, the trainee, the graduate trainee. It could also be an early career, very valuable member of your staff, maybe a junior manager in their early 20s. So this is very much a picture of your workforce. And those generations have different ideals, different values, different expectations, and they have different consumption habits in terms of how they consume their media or how they like to receive information. If I was to characterize Generation Z for a moment to stretch you and give you a sense of how communication is changing, the Generation Z audience of today, it isn't just those young people. This is the prevalent attitude and expectations of people today. So if you think about booking a holiday, in the past, perhaps the traditionalists, the baby boomers amongst us, we would have picked up a holiday brochure. In more recent times, a couple of decades ago, we may have looked at the website of the hotel to see what facilities were on offer. Today, we don't do that. We go straight to social media and we ask for recommendations from friends and colleagues. I'm heading to Spain. Can anyone recommend a good hotel in this particular resort? Or we go to sites like TripAdvisor, or if we're looking to get a new job, we go to sites like Glassdoor to get an authentic, unvarnished view, and a credible, independent, unbiased view of a particular service or product that we're looking to engage with. So it's important to recognize that Generation Z, they are digital first and digital only. They will turn up to your meeting without a pen and without some paper. They will expect to have information available to them, not just in a digital format, but in a mobile format. Again, Generation Z, some of them don't have a desk PC. They rely on a tablet, or increasingly they rely on a phone to do everything, absolutely everything. So it's really important that we think about ways in which we communicate, the channels that we use. Incredibly important. And I could talk all day about Generation Z and their expectations, but of course you'll also appreciate that today people are very concerned about the values of their organization. They're interested in sustainability, as we heard in previous calls. They're interested in the responsibilities of their employers and rules and regulations. And these policies and standards are very easy to get a hold of now. They're often talked about in social media. There's a lot of campaigning and protesting and signing of petitions. The change.org website in the UK is a great site which many people are campaigning and canvassing against policies by big employers and big brands. So today, Generation Z is that pervasive culture. So we have to make sure our communications are authentic, they are values-based, that they do adhere to policy, that they're compliant, and that they are essentially that they are credible. We can't give a glossy view from the chief executive anymore and expect that to cut through with modern expectations for communications. So I'm going to unpack some of the ways we respond to this in the next set of challenges. And I'm going to frame this around my own copyrighted version of effective communications. And I'm adopting a lot of C words, no rude C words, but lots and lots of C words, and my favorite letter of the alphabet. So we have what I'm calling the 10 C's approach to effective communications. And before I go through these in turn with the next slides, you'll see again from this diagram something I alluded to a little earlier, which is that internal comms and external comms, you may associate those with different outputs, with different channels, but you can see that overlap, and you can see the fact from that Venn diagram that internal comms and external comms are interwoven. And we must always think about, what if this email or this staff memo was sent to the press? What if this was published online? What are the risks of that? What would it say about my organization? What would it say about me, my policies, my objectives from this communication? So that's always a great test, to not put something in an email that you wouldn't want to see on the front page of a newspaper. But let's focus on internal, and let me talk you through these 10 steps, these 10 C's to effective communication. And I number them 1 to 10 here, but I'd like to encourage you to think of them as a cycle. So in my numbering 1 to 10, I started true north there with context. Setting the context for our communications communicating with clarity, with creativity, choosing the right channels, etc. In that clockwise cycle, and I'll talk you through those. But what I'm also going to implore is that we can, of course, start this cycle in different places. So if you look at around 8 o'clock on that cycle at co-design, for very confident communicators, very experienced communicators, they may start with co-design. They may start with canvassing the views of their workforce, with getting people on board, securing buy-in, getting contributions and collaboration from their staff to help shape their communications, to build confidence, to set the culture and the tone, to make sure that staff are going to be receptive before they even start crafting their message, setting the context, and choosing their channel. So let me start with context. Again, on each of these slides, I'll try as best I can to unpack these concepts with more C words. So there are 3 C words sitting underneath each of the 10 ideas that I want to talk you through. So in terms of context, it's really important, as I mentioned before about authenticity, it's really important that we state our case, that there's an element of transparency when we explain to people why we're getting in touch. So we might bring them into our world a little bit and say that we have a responsibility to the organization in terms of risk, safety, incident management. We may talk about the legislation that we're following. We may talk about our duty of care as employers or as leaders or managers. We may talk about a wish or a desire to keep them informed, to welcome them back to work, to give them guidance and support. So be really clear about why you're getting in touch. State that case for saying, this is why it's important that I connect with you right now. This is important. This is why we need to connect. We need your attention. We need your input. So that candor, that transparency is really important. But also let's be clear about what's in it for them. So you might outline why you're getting in touch, but let's also outline what you expect from them in return, why it's important that they engage with this communication, why they attend the Zoom meeting or the staff briefing, or they read the newsletter, or they click on the link to see the new policy, or sign a consent to say that they've seen this change to their working environment, and they're happy to comply and to make the relevant adjustments. So establishing collective goals is really important. An obvious thing to say, of course, but a lot of us just dive straight in to telling them what we think they need to know before explaining why it is that we're getting in touch and why they need to know. Next, again, it's obvious here, but clarity is really important. So that's about being concise. A great exercise, a great test, a great tool used by the best communicators is they will often draft the communications and then they'll go back and they will try and reduce it and reduce it and reduce it in length. So when I do media training and coaching with clients all around the world, including at time of crisis or preparing for crisis or incident, I do an exercise with them where I interview them and ask them a difficult question they might expect from a journalist. And they give me a response, and it's usually pretty good. It's usually around the 20 to 30 second mark. And then my challenge is, okay, let's do that again, but cut it down to 10 seconds. How can you cut out that superfluous, flowery fluffiness around your message to just be absolutely clear and to the point? And again, if you think of the best advertising slogans in the world, the ones that have that recall that are most memorable, they're the ones that boil it down to the most simple things. So Nike and just do it. And McDonald's, I'm loving it. They don't try too hard to get across lots of different emotions, lots of different messages. So clarity and concision is really important. It's also incredibly important that the information is correct. So that's everything from spotting any typos, which can change the meaning of a sentence or a message, making sure any links to important information or complementary or supporting materials, those links work and they're not broken. So you should always be ringing the numbers that you put into your communications, clicking on the web links, checking that the email inbox that you're suggesting they respond to is accepting incoming mail. So these are really important checks, and we'll talk about checks and evaluation a little later. But being accurate is just as important as being concise. And that's also about quoting from the right legislation. Again, going back to this Generation Z world, they will check it. They will have someone that very cynically on social media points out that you're quoting the wrong legislation, or your reference is out of date, or that you're giving an example for how the changes to the working environment post-COVID will affect a department, when in fact that department isn't going to be affected. So make sure you're testing and checking your messaging. And this is really important for me. It's a real bugbear of mine. It's something I tell all my teams over the years. There must be a call to action for your communications. You must avoid that scenario where at the end of your briefing, the end of your Zoom call, when you hang up the telephone, that the person you're trying to engage and compel to some action puts the phone down, logs off the Zoom call and says, well, what am I supposed to do with that? So what? What next? There must be a call to action. It must be, please visit the website and read the policy in full. It must be, please let us know that you've understood these changes and are happy to, sign a new terms and conditions for your working environment. It must be that the call to action is, so please register for our online safety briefing that takes place tomorrow, or please dial in at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning to hear more information, or visit the website to see our frequently asked questions. Make sure there's a call to action, that we're driving them to take action to try and complete that engagement that we want them to undertake. Now, creativity. This is the one that might fill some of you with some dread. You might think, oh gosh, I don't think of myself as very creative. I'm not a comms guy. I'm rubbish with images. I'm a bit of a technophobe. I don't know how to work with digital media. So again, you might seek some support from your comms colleagues, your communications and marketing department colleagues or professionals, or indeed take advice from consultants and supporters like mine. But this isn't about, despite the image there, drawing pictures or being an artist. This is about carefully crafting your message. So I talked before about doing your first draft and going back and making those cuts to ensure that it's concise and it's lean and it's to the point. So that crafting can also be about thinking about how you bring your message to life. How can you help people to remember the important parts of your communication? So that could be including an infographic. It might be easier to do a diagram. Going back to the one size doesn't fit all, some people will be very visual in their communication preferences. They'll want to see what this looks like in terms of a diagram or a flow chart. And that doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be literally drawn on the back of an envelope. It could be something that you've scribbled on a piece of paper, as long as it's clear. You could take a photograph of that on your mobile phone and upload that photograph as part of your communication. That speaks to the authenticity, the credibility point that I made in that first slide. People don't want to see fancy PowerPoint slides and animations. It feels too slick, too corporate, too glossy, and they may switch off and not engage with it. So if appropriate, include an infographic. Maybe think about an image that you can include. Or maybe the creativity comes in thinking about other voices that you can get into that communication. So rather than just hearing from you, could they hear from a manager of another department who echoes, amplifies, endorses the communication message that you're trying to get across? So quoting from a leader, a chief executive, an industry specialist, a recognized spokesperson, a union representative, or maybe just that person on the shop floor. Getting a different voice is also another way that we can be creative in our communications. Because we want our communications to be colorful. We want there to be a recall. We want them to recognize and remember the important messages. So we want our communications to be compelling, to be something that people want to read through to the end and don't just open the email, see a huge long tome of text, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and think, God, I don't have time to read this, and put it into either into the bin or into a read later file and never get back to reading it. So it's really important that we craft our communications carefully. Now, channels. You might have expected this to be higher up. You might have expected someone like me to tell you what's the best channel to use to reach staff. But of course, going back to what I said before about the different generations, the different preferences people have for communications, different styles, different levels of confidence and comfort. Some people would like to be spoken to face to face. Others will feel challenged by that and feel very uncomfortable. They'd much prefer to go away quietly and read lots of background information and content. So choosing the right channel is really important to find ways to connect with your audience. And you can calibrate those channels to meet the needs and expectations of different people. So you can engage with channels at different points in the day. So if you want to reach somebody on social media inviting them to a social event, then the best time to do that is after 6 p.m. in the evening, or it's between 12 and 1 when people are on a lunch break, or it's on an early evening on a Sunday as people are winding down at the end of the weekend and gearing up, checking emails and getting in the zone for the start of the working week. So you can calibrate those channels. And of course, you can cross promote. So you can engage with somebody on one channel, but you can refer them to discuss this with colleagues. Please join our message board. To find out more information about how you can get involved, see the web page on our intranet. To see a video of how this affects you and your colleagues in your working environment, in your office or on the factory floor, click on this YouTube link. Cross-promoting the channels is really important. It gives people a rich textual picture of your communication. It gives a breadth and a depth and a nuance to your communication that they won't get perhaps from just a single email or a poster on a notice board or an update to a web page that you're just assuming they'll know has happened. Your job isn't done once you've sent your email or you've updated the web page. Going back to my definition, communication has to be two-way, and you've only communicated effectively when there's been that level of engagement and feedback and dialogue. So before I move on from this page, let me just stress, this doesn't need to mean lots of extra work. I'm not suggesting that we're multiplying the work that you do, that after you've done your email, you then need to create a YouTube video, and then you need to make a poster, and then you need to do a press release for the staff newsletter. What we're saying is it's one single, consistent, concise message that can then be disseminated, cascaded. And you can do this, you can aggregate and do this automatically with various platforms and with the support of your communications and marketing colleagues. And that information can be cascaded, can be disseminated to different channels with that consistent thread running through the communication. So you craft the communications once and you cut and paste, you tweak, you adapt it, and you aggregate it to different channels. And that's where we get the best reach and the best connections. So that coherence is important. This is a picture I'm sure you'll recognize as a notice board, in this case, a health and safety notice board. And you can see the number of notices that are posted on there and how it'd be very easy for your message about returning to work post-COVID-19 could get lost in the noise, the white noise, the clutter of a notice board like that. And that's, of course, just a visible, tangible representation of what an email or a web page or a social media wall or post might look like when there's too much competing information. Consistency of message is really important. I've mentioned already clarity, but making sure it's coherent. So making sure that your message is aligned to the strategy of your organization. It fits with your organization's values. It's consistent with your safety policies. It's consistent with the chief executive's message, welcoming people back to work after COVID-19. So finding those points of coherence is something that's really important, and it's pretty easy to do. Looking at the chief executive's letter to staff, inviting them back to work, picking out a few keywords or sentiments and trying to echo those in your communications. Making sure that you're referring to relevant supporting information, complementary information, as I said there, again, reinforces, galvanizes, varnishes your message gives it a strength and a resilience that's really important. And again, I've mentioned campaign approach there. Like creativity, you might think, oh, I can't do campaigns, I can't do creative, I'm not a digital person. By campaigns, all I mean is joining it up. So making sure whether it's you or your colleagues that what you're putting on the intranet is consistent with what's going on the notice board, it's consistent with what's included in the staff newsletter, it's picked up in the staff briefing, it's mentioned on the Zoom call. Making sure that there's a campaign approach. Like any other campaign, single message that's delivered across different platforms and is joined up. So that's really just about joined up communications. Now, champions is something, again, I'm sure you'd probably expect me to talk about today, and it's really important. I've mentioned there that they are cheerleaders. They're the people that would be advocates. They would be enthusiastic and supportive, and they would amplify your communications to colleagues. But of course, they're much more than cheerleaders. They are the people that will provide some credibility for your communications. They will take it away from being, oh, it's the safety guy again sending an email, or it's, oh gosh, we've got another Zoom call tomorrow about risk and safety. It's a way of breaking down that cynicism and getting a sense of buy-in. But more than buy-in, you achieve a level of ownership. So you get colleagues to own the message because it feels as though it's been crafted by them for them. So you get that sense of the communication being authentic, being credible, it's endorsed, it's supported, it's approved by colleagues. And that's really important. And these champions, they're not always going to be your chief executive or the person that's a spokesperson for your organization. These could be the trade union representatives. They could be the line managers, the supervisors, of course. But equally, they might be that person that's the social secretary for your group of colleagues, the one that organizes the collections for people's birthdays, that sends around the cards to wish somebody well. They're the ones that organize the staff nights out or organize a special lunch. The social glue that keeps people together, the one that connects people, that has that energy. If you can get them on board as ambassadors, advocates, champions, and they don't have to be a mouthpiece for you. They don't have to be a puppet. They can be someone that just says, guys, have you seen there's an update on the intranet? Or guys, make sure at lunchtime you check the notice board, because I know there's a new message on there about the changes to our environment from our return to work after COVID. So just someone that signposts and gives some assurance to your messages is really important. And of course, they can also be critical friends. They can say, if you speak to them in advance, I'm not sure that message is really going to land very well. I think the thing that's missing from that communication is how it's going to affect that team, or how it's going to affect our shift patterns or our working hours, or how that's going to affect our travel or our work with clients. So it's really important that if we get those champions involved early, they can help us as critical friends. So as well as checking in with colleagues and checking the temperature of our communications, we can also be very sophisticated in our evaluation of our communications, increasingly sophisticated. And again, this might sound very specialist, and it may indeed be something that your communications and marketing colleagues or consultants or agencies do for you. In a simple sense, it's maybe just after you've sent a communication, grabbing a few friends, trusted colleagues, and saying, did that make sense? Did that? What was your takeaway from that message I sent around? And what was the one thing that you remember from that message that I sent? Or you might even just say, do you think that Zoom meeting was okay? Did people seem engaged to you? Have you heard any noise? Have you heard any feedback? So that's important. Don't just think you've done your job when you hang up on the Zoom call or you press send on the email. We can, though, increasingly with digital communications, look very clearly and very easily at whether that communication has got through. So if you think of that in simple terms, a social media post, you can see how many people have read it, how many people have liked it, given it a thumbs up, or even shared it. And we're back to that championing and endorsing and cascading of messages. So on social media, it's very easy to see. On web pages, with the right coding, which again, colleagues can help with, you can see whether how long people have spent looking at that web page. It's called dwell time. How long have they dwelled on that page? And if they're not dwelling on that page for long enough, you can think, well, why is that? Have I put my link to more information too high up on the page? So they're clicking on it straight away and leaving the page and not seeing the rest of the information, the rest of the context. Maybe I need to move that link further down. Maybe it's because the information's too cluttered, too much. I've put too much on there and it's just overwhelming people and they're just scanning it and then switching off and they're not absorbing the messages I need them to engage with. So it's really important to take that opportunity to check. And there are increasingly sophisticated tools that allow us to do this. The same with email. Simple tools but provide us with sophisticated data, which tells us if an email has landed in someone's mailbox, has it been opened, when was it deleted, did they forward it to anybody, So again, that's really important data that we can use. And again, with the guidance of your communications, your comms colleagues, that can be done fairly easily and can be put in place as part of the process. So it becomes very quick, very easy and automated. Getting that critique, that critical friend feedback I mentioned before is really important. Making decisions to correct and improve your communications as you go along. And again, if they're digital, of course, you can make changes after you've published your web page or your social media post. You can go in and edit and make refinements if you feel as though it's not cutting through, or there's something that you could have done differently, or you've had feedback about something that's perhaps missing or not clear. So back to those champions and back to that critique and critical friend. This is my sense that effective communications, if we're confident and if we are wanting to be authentic and secure ownership and buy-in, we can encourage and invite colleagues to collaborate with us, to help us to design those communications at the start of this process. So before we think about welcoming everybody back to work, telling them about the changes in terms of risk and safety to their working environment, we might think, okay, let's just take some soundings from some colleagues in different roles and different parts of my business. I'm going to say, what are the things that you're worried about returning to work? What are people talking about? What information do you think people are going to need? What are the things that we can provide assurance about? What would really make people feel comfortable and confident returning to work? So asking those questions, but then perhaps going a step further than that very simple bit of market research, we might say, could you maybe help us pull that together? If I draft an introduction, could you maybe suggest how I might phrase that next piece? Could you maybe provide me with a quote? Or is there a case study? How would that work for you in your team, in that part of the business, in that part of the power plant, in that part of the bank or the office? So again, thinking about how we get people to help us design that. And then being really clear and concise and transparent when we issue that communications, to say, thank you to the colleagues who've helped me to shape this communications to you today. We want to make sure we got this right. It's really important that you engage with this. And we've been thinking about how this change in the working environment post-COVID-19 will really impact on you. So here's our thoughts. Here's the case studies. Here's the videos. Here's the links to more information. And you have a really authoritative, compelling, engaging, robust piece of communication. And if we do that, of course, we build confidence from our staff. This is about building trust in our organization, in our policies, in our risk and safety strategies. So we need to demonstrate our commitment to giving colleagues accurate, timely information that's really important and that recognizes and responds to their interests. So we make that commitment to be listening, to be receptive, to be responsive. We give them some certainty. We say, look, if you give us feedback, we will act on it. We will look at our guidelines. We will make adjustments. We will make changes to the working environment. We will buy extra equipment, whatever it is. We give some commitment. We give them some certainty that it's worth engaging with us and that we're going to be perhaps giving them regular information, regular updates, regular communication. And if we can, we might even commit to setting that it's the last Friday of every month or every Monday morning, whatever is appropriate, that we make a commitment to giving people information. Communication that has rhythm, a message from the chief executive every Monday morning that you sustain over weeks, months, years, that gives people an element of certainty, of commitment. It gives visibility, and it shows that there's an element of rigor to your messaging and to your work. And that, of course, just gives credibility to you, to your role, to your office, your strategy, your policies, and credibility to the organization. This is an organization that takes risk and safety and incidents and hazards. We take this seriously. We care about you. We have a duty of care. We're aware of our responsibilities and we embrace them. So having that credibility as an individual, as an office, and as an organization and as a brand is really important. Again, you'll recognize why that's important externally for the reputation of your organization as well. And if we do all of that, we create a positive working culture. So in terms of communications, we secure the cooperation of colleagues. They feed back to us. They submit questions. They engage in questions and answers. They give us case studies of how things have worked or how things haven't worked and could be improved. They feel ownership, they want to get involved and to collaborate. And we build a sense of community. This isn't just about risk and safety messages being imposed upon them, being broadcast from top down. There's a sense of community that we're all working and adapting and adjusting to life in our organizations post-COVID-19. And if we do that, we secure the goodwill of staff. I've used the word here, currency. We have currency, we have some leverage, we have some goodwill in the bank, so that when there are difficult decisions, when there's restructuring of departments, when there are restrictions put in place, when there are changes to working patterns, that we've secured some currency, some goodwill. We've got a little bit of leeway, a bit of flexibility to make those changes, because we've taken people with us with our communications. We've been transparent, we've been real, we've had integrity, we've engaged them with really carefully crafted, well thought out, considerate, careful communications that help people to have empathy with us, to understand where we're coming from, understand we've got a difficult job, that we're trying our best, and that we are listening. And it's really important. Again, this is where communications is central to the success of any organization. You don't have brilliant brands, brilliant global businesses without a strong communications culture. And if you think of some of the best brands in the world, even if in the retail sector, you think of those brands like John Lewis in the UK and Tesco and Nike, the way their staff feel valued, the passion and the loyalty of their staff because of the culture of open communication, of valuing the voice of their staff, of listening and being responsive, as well as being creative and innovative within their sectors. That's a big part of the culture and the success of those organizations. So what's the risks of not doing it? As I come to a close here, if we don't communicate well, we can, of course, see non-compliance. Non-compliance generally in our work, but particularly in the changes and the requirements that we're required to put in place post-COVID-19. That could result in accusations of negligence on our part or on the part of our organizations, that we haven't been effective at communicating important changes, important policies, important messages. If we don't do that well, and it's proven that we haven't done it well, that we sent an email that nobody opened, that we posted an update on the website that nobody read, we can't say, I've done my job, I put the update on the website. We would be negligent if we hadn't made sure that people have engaged with and heard and responded to and engaged with our messages. It, of course, would result in staff feeling disconnected from risk and safety policies and strategies, but disconnected more generally from the organization. Are we an organization that cares about staff, that listens, that responds, that actually understands what it's like on the factory floor or in the office or on that front line working with clients? We then have a loss of credibility for our office, for our profession, for ourselves. We may be seen as a figure that, doesn't listen, is always firing out big, long emails, is always standing up and briefing staff. Nobody's really listening. Nobody's really engaging. And we lack credibility, and therefore we lack leverage and influence and power within our organizations for our work, which we all know is absolutely critical to our businesses. We create a disenfranchised staff culture. Staff feel demotivated. They're not passionate. They're not loyal. They're not advocates to the brand. And that ultimately spills out externally, that our organization is known to be not a good employer, an employer that doesn't listen to its staff, that doesn't have staff loyalty, that feels chaotic and in disarray. And again, you can think of lots of examples in the news where that happens. So to finish, for those of you from the UK, for those of you overseas may have seen some of these press conferences, the UK government, of course, at the moment is communicating around COVID-19 and the lockdown instructions and measures. And it's engaging the UK public consistently. So it's happening daily. So there's a certainty about it, about these briefings. They're well structured. Perhaps the scheduling of them, with the exception of Dominic Cummings turning up 30 minutes late, but generally the scheduling them is consistent. So there's a certainty there. But are the messages that they're getting out there clear? Are they concise? Are they creative? Are they really engaging with people? Are they listening to the concerns and the confusion that people are expressing? Of course, they're not. Are there, in terms of their creative presentation, their crafting, Think of the visual cues. We've gone from seeing signs on the podium where the Prime Minister would speak in red, warning of danger and hazards. Then now you'll notice the signs are yellow, and increasingly they've got more green on them all of the time. So that's perhaps conflicting. We're saying stay at home, stay alert, and then we're giving them the green light to break lockdown and do what they want. So we see with the messages coming out of government, go back to work, but work from home if you can. Don't go out, but do go out to exercise. But don't exercise with family, but you can exercise with somebody else from another household. Don't see other people in your family. Don't visit them in groups more than 10, but you can stand in a queue of 200 people in a supermarket or in a DIY store. So that confusion is something that's coming through in the modern world. And we have to ensure we don't repeat that and reflect that in our communications with our staff. So I'm finishing here with more C words, negative ones this time. If we don't do this right, it results in confusion, a conflation of our messages, getting mixed up with different things and causing people to be really unsure what it is we're trying to do. That creates cynicism. It creates chaos in our workplace. It can create conflict between staff and our safety and risk policies, between staff and management, between trade unions and our leadership teams. And ultimately that can cause crisis, can cause a breakdown of effective runnings of our organization because people don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They don't feel confident or comfortable or safe, and they down tools. Or if they don't down tools physically, then they're switching off mentally, they're disconnecting, they're disenfranchised. And that, of course, again, spills out into external damage to customers, to product, and to business performance. So ending up with that cycle, this is cyclical. We should be looking at communications as a cycle, something that we work through a process to deliver effective communications. So let me finish with a question slide. I'm happy to take any questions. I think Glenn's going to be collating these and curating these from the chat and firing some questions at me. And there's my details on there. If I can help any of your organizations with crisis communications planning, developing internal communication strategies, being a critical friend that carries out an audit or casts a supportive critical friend eye over your communications plans, then again, just get in touch and I'd be happy to see if we can help. And that's it. So happy to take questions collated by Glenn.
Michael, absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate that. Just while you've been delivering that, I've had a phone call from the White House and from Parliament. You haven't got 5 minutes, have you?
Yeah. Oh gosh.
You want a bit of a hand?
Absolutely. I get that a lot, from friends and family. And I think that myself, I sit watching some of these briefings head in hands about what advice have they been given them? Yeah. Why aren't they listening? Why have they presented it in that way? And I'm also, for my sins, a Newcastle United fan. And over the last decade of the leadership of that organisation, I've again just been absolutely dumbfounded at some of the own goals and errors that they've made in communications, or in their case, lack of communications with their fan base and with their staff, and how that's reflected on the external reputation and brand of my beloved football club. So yeah, I often think I could do with giving some of these guys a hand.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to what you've said there intently as you've gone through the presentation, and it does make you wonder, and I'm sure there's a number of people on the webinar this morning, when you look at people in professional positions like yourself who do this for a living, and what you think of some, not all, of the calamity and some of the messages that have come out in the last, well, probably since the very beginning. It just defies belief at times, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's been lots of examples over the years. Prince Andrew's recent interview, some of the ridiculous things that he said. The outlandish claims that as soon as he said it, I'm sure a lot of you, within 30 minutes, we were getting all the jokes on our private message groups. We were seeing all the memes. We were hearing the quips on the comedy shows and the panel shows. Just own goals because of a lack of planning, because of not understanding their audience, what their audience were interested in, not listening, not being responsive, not being open, transparent, having integrity, being authentic, trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. It doesn't work, whether you're Prince Andrew, Dominic Cummings, Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, the amount of foolish things that Trump said, and as the amount of credibility he loses with every tweet and every press conference. Yeah, it just shows how the impact it can have when you get it wrong.
No, yeah, again, I mean, absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate it. And given the time frame you had, you've really delivered on what we were wanting to give to the members and the guys on the call today. Before I launch into the questions, this is being recorded, so it's just an apology for those who are going to watch this at a later date. I've had about 20 emails from different people saying they couldn't log on. I've had difficulty for whatever reason accepting you onto the call this morning in the waiting room, so I do apologise, and I will be sending out as I say, the recording of the video as soon as I can today. So just to be clear on that, it wasn't a case of you were too late. It's a case of I couldn't accept you in. So again, apologies. Right, Michael, loads of questions. We've probably got maybe 6 or 7 minutes.
Okay.
So I'll try to go through them as quickly as I can in the hope that you can give clear and concise answers. So the first one, in the current climate, there is a need to transmit a lot of information to colleagues and ensure that this is up to date. Any tips to help avoid a situation where there is information overload or information fatigue?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would start, as I mentioned in my first slide, with setting context, trying to find that common ground, build that link to connect with staff. So I would say to them, look, guys, we're working hard now to welcome you back to work. We have a responsibility to make sure the workplace is going to be safe and the correct environment for your return. And there's a lot of responsibility on me, on my office, to ensure we deliver that. And there's a lot of changes that we need to communicate to you. There are 10 changes that we need to communicate with you. And to ensure that we don't overload you with information, we're going to give you information in manageable chunks. So let us start by telling you about the changes to the arrival and sort of logging on for your shift. Let me start by telling you about the changes around the return to work. Then tomorrow or next week or in the next briefing, we'll talk you through the changes to the impact on shift patterns or the impact on your equipment that you use or whatever it might be. So I would try and break the list of messages that you have to convey into manageable chunks. And I would also think about using that signposting technique. So you might say there's a lot to cover. These are around a number of themes, but particularly they're around the workplace environment, around changes to policies, and around some of our expectations around sort of communications or remote working, whatever it might be. These are the themes. There's a video for each one below, or click here to find out more information about each one, and we will highlight each area in the subsequent briefings or in the next newsletter or whatever it might be. So think about how you can almost serialize and break that up, making sure that your message is concise, it's clear, and that you're telling them that you're making sure there's a call to action, you're engaging with them. So the first information is about the changes to the workplace. We want you to look at this. We want you to absorb it and fire back any questions, or we want you to tick to say that you've read it and you've agreed to the new changes. So make sure there's that call to action.
And that piece around communication is two-way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So again, you might take that sounding before you start that process from colleagues to say, look, guys, we've got a lot of things we need to communicate to the staff. What do you think are going to be the most important ones that we'd highlight first? What are the difficult or the contentious ones that we might not highlight first, that we might get some more engagement and build up to? So again, just testing and talking to colleagues, having a couple of sounding boards would be really helpful. So I'm sure you can all think of people that you could speak to.
Yep, excellent. I mean, so many really great questions here. What I'm going to say is I'm going to try and pick 2 more because I am conscious of the time, and I'll invite anybody who has asked a question that I haven't been able to pose to Michael to contact him directly. He is accepting people to do that, and obviously his details are on the slide there. So apologies in advance. I'm just not going to have the time. There's so many. but I'm going to ask two that I think really are, very important, because a couple of people have concurred with this question. Okay, so some businesses may not have necessarily managed the COVID-19 situation well in terms of communication up to now. Are there any tips on repairing organizational reputational damage or trying to repair sort of brand reputation perception? I think that's a great question, that, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually a lot of my work is in that external brand reputation work. So a lot of my work is helping organizations to tell their story, to position themselves in their marketplace, to enhance, or in some cases repair, their brands. So that's really about going back to the values of the organization. What are they trying to achieve? Being much more explicit about those values in their communications. It's about being honest and in some cases making concessions and making honesty. Saying again, this Generation Z, the prevalent Generation Z culture that we have now, where people expect some honesty and some integrity from the organizations and the brands that they engage with. So saying, look guys, we think we got this wrong, and we're going to speak to our staff to understand the issues more clearly, and we'll come back with a plan and a commitment to addressing some of the challenges and the concerns that you've raised. I think that's really important. It is of course damage limitation. It's in some cases it's a case of closing the door after the horse has bolted. But to not do it in the way that to double down and not do it in the way that we've seen recently, again, Trump, Johnson, Cummings, it's incredibly damaging. It's terminal damage in the eyes of many audiences to the credibility of those individuals, because they doubled down. They refused to show any humility, any integrity, to any sort of honesty to admit mistakes or to concede any ground. So being brave and being bold, knowing that strong organizations can concede, can listen, can admit to mistakes. It echoes leadership as well. Good leaders will admit to making mistakes. Good leaders will relish making mistakes and learning from them. Again, you think of the big entrepreneurs in the world. If you've read any of their autobiographies or seen their interviews, they revel in taking risks, in making mistakes, and in learning from them. And it's the leaders who don't do that they project a communication culture in their organization, which is always about covering up, about denying, and they're an organization that don't have a good reputation internally or externally. So I think admitting mistakes if you've made errors, but crucially going back to basics, looking at your values, looking at your responsibilities, and asking colleagues to help you and to shape that message, welcoming people in with that co-design and collaboration. Instantly gives you credibility. It helps you to get that message and that sense of ownership from everybody.
And I suppose, as going back to one of your very important points as well, it links very nicely with authenticity, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, if the chief executive's made a cock up with a message, going back to the staff and helping them to deliver the next message and the response gives it that credibility. It shows the chief executive as being human, being prepared to listen, to work with colleagues, to adapt, to be resilient, contemporary, modern, responsive, all the virtues we'd want to see in our organizations, in our leaders, and indeed in our, we'd like people to think of ourselves and our officers in the same way.
Yeah, excellent. And one final one, again, we could probably spend a long time on this one, but do you think there are any particular challenges about communicating issues around COVID-19 when there is so much uncertainty? Oh, you may have to answer that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I would mention the word consistency. It's important that we don't reinvent the wheel. That we don't think, I'm going to sort of do an email and I'm going to summarize the challenges of lockdown and I'm going to summarize the restrictions and then say how that applies to my organization's working environment. Don't reinvent the wheel. Quote directly from the lockdown guidelines, notwithstanding that the way that they've been communicated has been confusing in those press conferences. There is clear, guidance, there's clear criteria. So don't try and rewrite that or summarize it or, write your own version of it. So I think in terms of COVID-19, refer to trusted sources. So I mentioned complementary information. I mentioned signposting. I mentioned building credibility and having sort of rigor and developing really robust and credible, trustworthy messages. So I would refer to, Public Health England guidelines. I'd refer to, the Chamber of Commerce if they've issued guidelines on businesses returning to work, or, COVID secure businesses, whatever it might be. So refer to trusted sources would be my first point. Yeah. I would also say that you should be mindful that in terms of returning to work, in inverted commas, that means different things to different people. Some colleagues will be physically returning to the working office factory environment. Others will be working remotely. Others will still be furloughed, and you still need to communicate with those furloughed colleagues, albeit you're not asking them or expecting them to work. You still need to have the same transparency and courtesy to engage with those furloughed colleagues as well. So I think COVID-19 presents some really unique challenges. Yeah. I think it's really important that we don't, we stay apolitical in our messaging and our interpretation. We signpost to trusted, credible, established sources, and we try and demonstrate how that has an impact specifically to our organization with clear, concise, sharp, tailored messages about how that established guidance refers and relates to our workforce environment.
No, excellent. Excellent. Sorry, I was just laughing there. We've had one of our callers on the webinar today, Michael, suggesting you for Prime Minister.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I've got during lockdown, I've not had a haircut, so I'm starting to have a bit of a Boris Johnson.
Yeah, ditto. Ditto. Well, look, I'll let you take a breather and have a glass of water. And just once again, thank you so much, Michael, for standing in today and delivering a fantastic webinar just before I close out. So thank you very much. So before we leave today, I once again, on behalf of the Regional Strategy Group, wanted to give a huge thank you to all our presenters over the last 5 or 6 weeks, including Scott Moffat of PFC, Barry Cooper from Pentagon Assurance, Tamar Carell from Invelo, John Devitt from Recovery for Life, and last but by absolutely no means least, Michael, for providing today's excellent session. What a way to finish. I think everyone will agree these webinars have not only been packed with detail and pragmatic, up-to-date and current content, they've provided each and every one of us with superb takeaway messages that can be used in all of our respective workplaces. So thank you all to the guest speakers for that. Excellent effort. Cheers. So as I said at the beginning, that's it for now in terms of the returning to work webinars. Good luck to you all as you start the phase back, return to your respective workplaces. I hope the transition is smooth, safe, and a successful one. We, as a regional strategy group, will be taking a break for a short period and returning back probably towards the end of Q3 this year with some more CPD events. And depending on where we are with COVID-19, that will dictate whether there'll be webinars, visits, or further presentations. We'll see. In terms of building on the success of the last iirsm North East and Cumbria Conference and Awards we held last year in Yarmouth, Teesside, the inaugural event, we've moved this year's event to the spring Easter of next year. So please keep a close eye on North Eastern Cumbria LinkedIn page for updates. You never know, we may be able to see Michael in person and one or two of the other speakers as well. I'm confident we'll be able to build on the inaugural event and make it even better next year. And hopefully for those of you that are able to attend, you'll do so. So finally, thank you all for logging on today. And for those who have done each week, stay well and all the very best for when you return to work. And once again, thank you very much, Michael.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.